Hello, Motorrad World fans, and welcome to this episode of Talking MotoGP with myself, Rob Portman, and Paul Scott. And this time around, we're going to talk everything from the recent Japanese round of the MotoGP World Championship. Motegi was the racetrack out in Japan. And Paul, first of all, how are you? How are things your side?
Yeah, Rob, all good, thank you. Yeah, lovely here in sunny South Africa. I believe you've been having quite a wet last few days. Yeah, everything's good this side, Rob. Yeah, and looking forward to another fantastic show. And welcome to everyone who's tuned in and to all those who are going to tune in during the show.
We've already got Van Erasmus. Good evening from Hartswater. Dick Crosby. Good evening, Robin Paul. Paolo Cicchetti. Brian Ritchie. Good evening, everyone from Hanau. I'm sorry, Brian, I've probably said that horribly wrong. Leroy Barter, good evening, Rob Paul and MotoGP friends. Wayne Taylor, good evening, everyone. Looking forward to the show. Potential talking points. Danny Pedrosa coming out and saying that KTM have already moved development of the bike towards Acosta. Yes, Wayne Taylor, absolutely is going to be a talking point, as will Brad and Acosta and KTM project in general. JP Swick, howdy MRW crew. JP, thank you for joining us. Mike Teal, good evening, Rob and Paul. Greetings from myself and grandson Liam Townsend. A weekend of ups and downs for sure. Absolutely, Mike and Liam. Welcome again once again to the show. James Thompson, David Callahan, Ruan Dietliff, Al Camino, Asif Ganjwa, James Thompson, watching in from Leeds, UK. James, I was telling Paul just before we came on air, I've never seen so much rain in my life in the last couple of weeks in the UK. And Paul was saying that they need rain in the UK. So I'm going to back in South Africa in Joburg. So got to find a way to try and send some water back that side because we've got plenty of it. Yeah, I can tell you that much. Justin DP, Brett Lawson, Deep Sea Diver Schmidt, Gordon De Beer, looking forward to talking about the boring race. Zenzi Mofakate, Michael Maggott, Tulani Oscar, Matuvula, Wimpy van der Berg, Ellie McDonald, Francois Retief, Adam Sweeney, Edwin Norris, Andrea Jacobs, Trevor Dalglish, and the list goes on. We'll be here all night if I want.
Yeah, excellent. More the merrier.
Well, absolutely. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Remember, if you're in the land of YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button, and Facebook, just like and share as far and wide as possible. Emil Brand also joining us right now. I think, Paul, the best place to probably start is the Gas KTM, Brad, Acosta kind of project. We know there's been a lot happening with that project. We've spoken about it the last couple of weeks. Guidotti's gone. Aki Ayo's coming in. You said one of the head engine guys has left. The Italian stallion technical guy that came in from the caddy that was going to solve everything, he's left for personal reasons and homesick. He has now signed for Aprilia to replace the Aprilia man, big boss, who's going to HRC, not the big boss, the technical guy who's going to HRC for next year. So there's this musical chairs, not only on track, but off track. But it certainly has been this big someone at KTM went, right, we need to mix this up now. We've spoken about it before. Sometimes when results aren't good, sometimes it's good to freshen it up. I didn't think KTM would take it this literally. But then again, as Wayne Taylor said, the big piece coming out literally today is Danny Pedrosa coming out and saying we had to twist our project. Very much a case of we were going in one direction, looking from the outside and being judgmental, and you could say, right, they were following a Brad Binder direction because he's the lead man and he was the man that they were really pulling information from now. And now we're twisting that, and it seems like very much they're going this Pedro Acosta way. Now, yes, I know us as South Africans will go, blah, 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 blah. We spoke about it the last couple of weeks. In many ways, why wouldn't KTM go that way? Because they've clearly looked at the data. They've clearly found something. He put it on pole position. Yes, we know what happened in the two races, the sprint and that. But the fact is the positions he was in when those mistakes happened. He's the rookie. It doesn't matter what he does this year. Next year's the big thing. But clearly they're looking at that data. They're looking at the pattern and going, right, the way this guy's riding the bike, setting up the bike is the way we need to go. And in some ways, I do agree with it. I obviously get upset because Brad's our number one boy and he must be the blue-eyed boy forever. But look at the bigger picture. I don't think it's as necessarily a bad thing.
Well, Rob, I think KTM have got big pressure, as have Aprilia, Yamaha, Honda. but specifically we're talking KTM because it's our interest with Brad being there, but also because they've got the rookie sensation. And love him or hate him, he's the future of MotoGP. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but besides David Alonso in Moto3, there's nobody that really stands out like Pedro Acosta. And look at his record. It's very Marc Marquez, Valentino Rossi, esque, where Moto3, Moto2, world champion, moves to MotoGP. So yeah, this is rookie year. One thing we spoke about end of last year, beginning of this year, and we were very worried that Pedro would become the star at KTM. And unfortunately for Brad, probably the last 5 races, as much as Brad has probably, I think, beaten him in 3 out of the 5, Pedro's been faster. There's no doubt about it. You can't deny that. Yes, he's crashed. He's made mistakes. But as an average, Friday morning, Pedro Acosta, top 4. Friday afternoon, Saturday, gets into Q2 more often than Brad. So I can see their sentiment. Being the rookie, are we giving him grace? He's allowed to crash. Well, I'm going to go back to 2006 or 7, whenever it was, when Casey Stoner got on the LCR 500 Honda for the first time. I think it's still a 500 then, whatever. Anyway, the LCR Honda. Yeah. I just remember vividly, I think it was every second practice session, he was tossing that Honda down the road. It must have cost Cecchinello an arm and a leg in spare parts. But you know the saying, Rob, you're a racer. You can make a fast guy smooth. You can't make a slow guy fast. Now here you've got a Pedro Acosta who is absolutely no doubt he's fast. Danny Pedrosa's riding that bike at the same time. And if he feels that is the way they need to start steering the project, unfortunately for us and for Brad, that could be we know that's the direction they're now going to take. So, right or wrong, the results are speaking for themselves. And I know people who look only at the results will say, but Brad's ahead of Pedro in the championship. KTM look at the bigger picture. But going back to what I said initially, you mentioned it, 3 months ago, the downturn in KTM's financial position. So they're now under pressure to start getting results. No win since 2022. Man, let's be realistic. Even Honda won last year, with runs in America, which is a one-off thing, but they still won the race. So, yeah, I think KTM, they now are, I think they're beyond desperate. They know they need to start winning, and they need to start winning soon. They can't wait another 6 months.
As Wayne Taylor says, he's referring to the Honda going the Danny Pedrosa route when Nicky Hayden was the champion, but they produced the bike for Danny Pedrosa because they saw him as the future. And we've said it many times, there can only be one real number one in a team. And clearly KTM have kind of shifted that focus to Acosta. Listen, as I said, they've given maybe the Brad direction or the Danny direction, and I'm not saying that's what it is, and this is what's happening. This is just what we're pulling apart from the outside. They've given that a go, maybe hit a bit of a brick wall. So why not try a fresh idea? Clearly, Pedro has something. Even when I watched him at Motegi this weekend, he's just able to hit those marks better. It just looks. I used that word control last week. Just looks more in control. Brad has done a great job this year. Qualifying's always been kind of Brad's Achilles heel. He did it again now in Motegi. He's able to pull out a fast lap, even when the chips are against him, even when he's had technical problems and crashed, and this has happened in the pits. He's able to climb on that bike, dig deep, and just pull out a lap time. It's not the smoothest. It's entertaining to watch, which is great, but you can't do that for 20-something laps on a MotoGP bike. We all talk about Martin and Pecco just now, and yes, it was a boring race in terms of actual racing, passing and that. But when you watch those guys in that rhythm, not making any mistakes, riding that precisely and that smoothly, you can understand, why they are the benchmark and at the level that they are, and why everyone else is struggling to catch up. So yeah, well, I agree. It's fantastic watching Brad Binder go all kinds of out of shape, and that is when he's at his fastest and best. You can't do that these days for 20-something laps, and so maybe that's what KTM are trying to achieve with this. The shift is right. It's also maybe forcing Brad in a way to go, right, Brad, you've got to change your riding style a little bit to kind of go with this direction. The bike's not going to want to do that you're trying to do it. If you do this and this and this, you'll go faster on the bike, or the bike will be easier to manage. So I think it's a bit of both sides, and we've spoken about it last week, I think, as well. I do think there's a bit of a adjusting that Brad needs to do. I think yes, the fingers can be pointed at KTM. They haven't stepped up in many ways. That project hasn't gone where it should be. But having said that, Brad has been, at the forefront of it. Brad has been the development guy. Now, whether they've been able to listen to him and do everything he wanted to, I don't know. But clearly, they feel it's got to a point where it needs change. Now, I'm upset, but I'm not upset because, as a couple of people commented earlier, Brad needs to look at this and say, right, pressure off. Let them go develop. One thing I loved about Brad this weekend was he looked a completely different character in all of his press conferences and everything. He's like, I'm not reinventing the wheel anymore. I found a setup that we went back to, and I'm tweaking that. I'm working with that. And I think that's got to be their mantra for the rest of the season now, and it was almost an open admit to saying that's what we've been doing. And we've said it from the outside. It looks like every weekend they're just going up, down, left, right, and center. Whereas Pedro's keeping it, a little bit more in a parameter compared to the rest. And there was not the overall results, although Brad was the top KTM at the end of the day when you cross the line, and it's put him as the top KTM in the championship. It was a much better performance from Brad in the qualifying, in race. Yes, he had the bad luck with the sprint race, but there was a lot of positives from this weekend with Brad. So whether that's already them being forced into this new twist, whereas KTM said, right, we're not sending anything to Brad, go back to your Qatar, your Mazzano, whatever setup you liked, and tweak it from there. But there had to be something had to change. And I think now the next step is potentially Brad also making a little bit of a change with himself, with his riding style, to try and smoothen that process out.
Yeah, Rob, I agree in part with what you're saying. The other side of the coin is Brad's been developing this bike, and we're going to say predominantly for the last 5 years. Jack came into the team last year, and immediately the first 2 or 3 rounds, whatever Jack brought with him benefited everybody, but specifically Jack. Then did they head off on a little bit of a Jack tangent, or did they head back to a Brad tangent? Because suddenly Brad was drilling Jack. So I'm a little bit confused here in my own head. What should they do? Brad has been the focal point. I fully understand how it works. Pedro is now more often than not consistently faster than Brad. Not finishing the races, different story, but generally through all the sessions. So if they are heading that way, I don't think it's a bad idea, depending on how different they set the bikes up. Now, we've seen Brad his whole career, but maybe highlighted this year because he's the lead KTM that is sideways into every turn. Jack does it very similar, but Jack's 6 or 8 places behind Brad. Now, Pedro's ahead of Brad when he does finish the race or when they are together, and he looks so much smoother. So how's Brad going to adapt? That's what my head is saying to me. It's going to be very difficult for Brad because he's developed this bike on that style. I don't know. It's going to be a tough one. I can understand KTM's sentiment. I don't know if it's going to work. I honestly don't know. Are they going to give Brad the freedom to do what suits Brad, or are they going to force Brad to do what suits Pedro? It can cause a bit of a rift already. I'm not saying in any way that's what's going to happen, but it could be if Brad suddenly gets told what he has to do, as opposed to him telling them or asking them to go in a different direction. It's going to be a very, very tricky scenario, specifically that the words today came from Danny Pedrosa. It wasn't from a journalist. It wasn't from one of those clickbait Facebook pages about MotoGP. It's from Danny Pedrosa. So we got to take that's 99% cast in stone.
It is. And, going back to what you just said now about the whole Miller project and that, I do wonder if KTM also have just been trying too much with, Miller's side of the garage and, him and his Ducati information with his Ducati techs. And if it's all just got into this kind of spiral ball of a mess of data, and they actually just, need to get back to a kind of ground zero and go from there. Listen, it all depends. Akiayo is going to come in and which way he's going to steer it. At the end of the day, I think it's going to be his call. He's going to sit down and go, right, we're going this Pedro route, or Pedro, you go your route. Brad, you and your team go your route, and may the best man win. It is a tricky one. It's a very tricky one because there is clearly a difference in riding style between Brad and Pedro. So and at the moment it looks very hard to see a Brad bike suiting a Pedro and a Pedro bike suiting a Brad. So I think they do have to find more of a direction. If I look at Danny Pedrosa, I mentioned it last week, I think he leans more towards the Pedro Acosta riding style.
Definitely.
He doesn't back it in, and he's a bit more precise, bit more direct in his way. It's just, looking at Brad on the weekend, he just seems to have to make these corners so long. He's got to break. The commentators even said he's got to break so deep, and that opens the door on the inside. And and he's always trying to force that bike onto that apex. There were laps in Pedro Acosta, especially in that sprint race, where you were like, they're not going to catch this guy, and they weren't. He was just steering away, and he crashed purely because he was too confident. He had such a good feeling with that bike that he just thought, I can go as fast as I want on this motorcycle now. And unfortunately, there's a downside to that, because Brad looks at that and goes, you see, you can't push. So now that's here in Brad's mind. He's going out every time going, I can't push this thing. I've got to ride this thing at 90%. 95%, because as soon as I go 100%, I'm going to land up like Pedro Acosta. And he came out in the one briefing and he said that, at least it's not me. And he's kind of saying, you see, this is why I'm finishing sixth, because if I push, I'm going to land up on the deck. I'm not in the luxury position of Pedro Acosta where he crashes and goes, don't worry, it's the rookie. Brad's got to be top KTM. He has to. He was supposed to be challenging this year. So he's got that pressure. So he's thinking, or Pedro's thinking, just go as fast as I can. If I crash, oh well. Brad's thinking, well, go as fast as I can, but if I crash, I lose points. And KTM then point the fingers at me, and the whole of South Africa points fingers at me, and. So I do. I mentioned it to you before we came on. My biggest concern with the Brad thing now is how the paddock and the commentators I don't want to say forgetting about Brad, but like, Pedro Acosta on pole position, fantastic game, and he thoroughly deserves it, of course. But then it's Brad Binder fifth or Brad Binder sixth, kind of like, oh, well done, but we know what's going to happen. He's going to, even when he got a good start in the main race in the sprint, oh, Brad's up there. But it's kind of like, okay, well, he's going to fade. He's not going to last. His bike's going to break or something. You know what I mean? It's not that Brad Binder that they were talking about a couple of years ago. And watch, he's going to make a pass on the inside, and watch out for, how spectacular was that? That stock just seems to have dropped a bit, which is upsetting for me, because there's still something big there. He's just being strangled at the moment by this project that either he's lost complete faith in, or that they've just hit this brick wall, or that something has happened where they need to kind of reset and find a rhythm again.
Well, Rob, 100%. I mean, 2 years ago, Brad Binder, the commentators only knew him as the Sunday man. They actually discarded, and now we're talking before the sprint races came into being. They discarded whatever Brad did on a Friday and Saturday. It didn't matter. You could almost put him at the back of the grid and say, well, if you want an entertaining afternoon, watch Brad Binder. He's going to go from 16th on the grid to 3rd or 4th, guaranteed. Now we're not seeing that Brad Binder. Now we're seeing a Brad Binder who has great starts, gets into, now if you're not on a Ducati, you're lucky if you get into 3rd or 4th, which he does. And then, suddenly he's 5th, suddenly he's 6th. And that's not the Brad that we're accustomed to seeing. And I believe it's exactly what you've said. Brad has got to a point where he says, this is the point of no return. If I cross this pace, this line, I'm going to end up in the gravel. So I'm not prepared to do that. And it's a mature attitude, but in his head, he knows it's not a winning attitude. If that's the thought process, which I think you're quite right by saying that. Where Pedro he's learning the bike, yes, but he's getting away with murder because he's the rookie. Just imagine if there was another competitive rookie in the class now. Unfortunately for us, there isn't.
Right.
So he's the rookie champion regardless. But if there'd been a rookie, Firmin Aldeguer, this year on a Ducati challenging him, would he have had a different outlook?
Yeah.
That would put maybe a different spin on it, where right now, exactly what you say, I believe that KTM stroke gas have said to him, there's your bike, do what you want, go as fast as you want, you're here to learn. So they don't, actually, I'm not saying they don't care, but they acquire enough data from him During the weekend, they see how fast he is. And if he happens to bin it, and he's not binning it because he's not trying, he's setting fastest laps. Then they say to him, okay, this is what we've learned, and he can go back and hopefully it benefits Brad by saying, okay, I crashed twice in turn 9. What was the lean angle? What was the throttle position, revs? They can analyze all of that. And is he riding that much harder than Brad? So there is a benefit to it. But certainly right now, Brad's got the short end of the stick because, as you say, he's the number one KTM guy. And as a collective, they're not delivering the results everybody, but specifically South Africans, were expecting of them.
I think we just have to accept and really, really accept that Pedro Acosta is the supreme talent that he actually is. And it's going to help the project at the end of the day. I think I'm excited at the prospect of next year with Enea Bastianini's information, Brad's information, Pedro's information. I mean, Danny Pedrosa must be licking his lips because until now, he's really only had Brad's fast data. You can take Jack's data, but means nothing if you finish, like you said, 10th and 11th, and he's there for 3 laps because he could put a soft tire on and then he has no tires. It's just, I don't understand that thought process either. But it can only be beneficial to the project, and it's whether or not Brad has to adapt to this new direction, or as you said, if he's still going to get this freedom to ride, still do your own thing. This is what works on Pedro's bike. This is what works on Nea's bike. This is what works. Try. But this is the thing. Do you want to be going into race weekends trying these things? Yeah, Danny can do as many laps as he wants, and he goes, right, boys, this is what I think is good. This is what the computer says is good. Like people, a couple of comments down the side here was, Paul Espargaro came with a chassis that Paul liked, and Brad went no. But is Paul liking it 2 seconds, a second off the pace? It's such a hard one. Unless Brad and them could get their concessions back and literally do extra work in the background, you're not going to win. You're not going to be as competitive as you need to be testing on race weekends. Ducati do not go. Martin, Marquez, Pecco, none of those Ducati riders going to a race weekend testing anything. Nothing. There's not a new wing. There's not a new nothing. And if it does, it's ready. It's plug and play. It's plug and play. It's not this. I don't want to say thumb suck because that's a bit harsh, but it just seems to be that way in many ways. You see all these different types of wings come on the back, and then it's this different fin on the back, and then it's this and this and this. It just, I think it just got to a point where KTM, I don't want to say lost. They must have had this inventory of parts and stuff that the poor parts guy lost track of. I think they got to a point where they went, right, we've got to bring this back to a more manageable point, because at the moment it isn't. And Brad's attitude, he was still smiley, positive, but there wasn't, and I'm not saying this in a bad way at all, but it wasn't, me and my team are working hard to find the problem. There was none of that from Brad this weekend. It was, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm going with the base setup that I want, and we're going to attack. That was it. There was none of this playing the politically correct, being Mr. Nice Guy. It was, right, I've had enough of this cock now. We need to find a direction, find it now, and move on.
But maybe that's exactly what they need. Maybe there has been too much of a Mr. Nice Guy, lovey-dovey feel within the team, and now Pedro's stepped in and he's upsetting that part of the apple cart a little bit, because he's saying, no, don't be stupid. We're going in this direction. And now maybe that's what they need, is for Brad to say, so someone possibly in Brad's team will say, no, check what Pedro's doing. Let's do it. And try this and try that. I think if Brad is taking a little bit more control, if that's the case, that could be a very good thing, because now he's saying, oh, enough of this, as you say. Now we're going to go back to what we know and we'll work around that. Could be a very good thing. Rob, we discussed it last week. You cannot go nowadays with the limited amount of practice and qualifying over a race weekend. Absolutely no chance can you arrive on Friday morning and be trying things. Not a chance. As you say, there's no ways in heck Ducati are doing that. So KTM can't, you can't have Brad, and we've discussed it. Why do they seem to spend so much time in the pits? Is it because they're quickly fitting a new X, Y, or Z? Now he tries it for 3 laps and he says, no, the old part was better. They've got to go back and I don't know. But certainly they need to hone their focus on one thing now, and let's drive that till the end of the season. End of the year, they've got a little bit of testing, and the beginning of new year, try things then. But right now, I think they need to try and iron out the problems that they certainly have at the moment.
Yeah, just to answer Tulani's question, why did Anaya complain about Brad? Tulani, basically because Anaya's on a GP24, the greatest bike out there. Brad's on this lemon of a KTM at the moment, and Brad was racing, and Anaya, for some reason, forgot he was on a racetrack and didn't like the fact that Brad was racing him.
Exactly.
Anaya's complaint was that if he didn't get held up by Brad for a couple of laps, he could have challenged for the podium. So Brad kind of put a stop to his podium. Now, basically what he's saying is Brad should have known that I'm the Foster rider I'm the Foster package, and just let me through and not fought me, which is, I didn't expect that from the beast, to be honest. I can understand it was that frustration straight after the race. It cost me a podium. We know that's what it was, but that's basically what it was. This other comment here with Deep Sea Diver: why does the KTM of Brad and Jack fade during the race? They have the same riding style compared to Pedro. Now, Deep Sea Diver, I'm going to disagree with you there in the riding style, because it's something that we've been speaking about for a while. I do think Pedro's riding style is a lot more direct. I saw it again this weekend. He shortens corners. He's on the apex a lot more. He's right over that inside curve a lot more. He gets all the kind of, backing in and gets all the bike out of shape settled a lot quicker compared to Jack and Brad. Brad's always been that kind of, riding style.
Loose,
This is what we've been talking about. Maybe he needs to iron out one or two of those little chinks. I think Jack's biggest problem is that he does. I think he sets his bike up to a comfortable fast pace feel, which doesn't translate to a 24-lap feel. I think he overrides the bike. He does that. You can see straight from the start. He doesn't even think about tire management. Jack just wants to try and get to the front, put the cat amongst the pigeons for a bit, and then we know what's going to happen. Whereas Brad's a little bit more methodical, where he goes, and you could see it again, exactly what you said, Paul. You could see it on Sunday. He went, saw Pedro crash, and probably went, I'm going to head the exact same way if I try and keep up this pace. He did. He fought valiantly against Enea Bastianini. But that battle just highlighted again where, and I don't want to put blame on Brad, but at the same time, you have to look at the rider that's on the bike. Is it Brad's riding style, or is it the bike that's causing Brad to go into the corners deep, can't bring it back to the apex, backing it in all the way in? I think it's a combination of both, but it really did highlight while Enea Bastianini was literally looking for a way past, and it was this very wide KTM in and out of the corners, getting in his way. One big positive was the acceleration of that KTM engine out of the corners. When Brad hits that squat button, Jesus, that thing just launches and goes. And that was Bastianini's biggest problem, was Brad obviously very late on the brakes and going deep in the corner, knowing that he's going to come back. So Enea just had this false sense of security in a way, and then this KTM just launched out. So there were positives to take out of the weekend. The positives being Pedro's speed, Brad's speed. Brad led FP the Friday session, something we haven't seen in a while. He was talking a good race. Unfortunately, I think the mechanical on Saturday robbed him of good race data that he could have used for Sunday as well, very early on in the Saturday race, which was unfortunate. But then there was also the downside. We can sing praises to Pedro and look how fast he was. At the end of the day, he did crash while trying to go fast, and that's still their biggest problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to the question was, between Jack and Brad's style, which I think is more similar, then you go to Pedro. The way Brad's going to have to move forward, we saw it when he was racing Bastianini. He's going to need to adapt a little bit more, I think, towards a smoother style like Pedro, because what he was doing is running wide, and luckily at Japan, the corners allow you a bit of a wider entry and a bit of a wider exit from the corner. When we get to Phillip Island next weekend, it's a much more precise track. Your margin for running wide in the turns, possibly turn one's a right-hander, that long left-hander into, I think it's the Hayshed. That's probably the only turn where you've got 2 or 3 lines. The rest of that track, you've got to keep it very precise, and just think back in your head of all the corners. Everyone's on the inside, tight. Might be detrimental to the KTM. So Brad's going to have to, from now, I think, start thinking along those lines. How can he go fast but smooth? And his out of shape is perfect for him, but it might not be the right It might be the direction, the style that he needs to consider a little bit. I don't know. It's a difficult one. So yeah, let's see what happens. But his race with Bastianini, exactly what you say, Rob. That KTM, and there was a lot of comment on social media. The KTM's dog slow. That bike is an absolute rocket. The problem is if you can't, you're never going to win a MotoGP race by going fast in a straight line only. The bike has to be able to turn, and it has to be able to exit the turns. Now, we know the problems with the Hondas, too much wheel spin out of the corners. So that's a problem. The KTM has got fantastic drive, but it's into the corners that they seem to struggle in comparison to the Ducatis. So in terms of absolute speed, that bike is a rocket ship.
Yeah, it goes back to just before Silverstone and at Silverstone, the question that I kind of asked Pedro, and it was kind of a vague response. I don't know if he really understood what I was trying to say to him. Is you can see, because what it looks like to me is Pedro is riding the KTM the way he thinks and feels the KTM needs to be ridden to go fast. I'm not necessarily saying it's the way that Pedro would ultimately like to ride the KTM. He's going into the corners, riding in the middle of the track in some corners, and this has been a theme throughout the whole year so far. If you look, on board, he's braking here, and the other guys are braking, the curb to curb, and so there are these little hints that Pedro's having to, or had adjusted his riding style to what he thinks is going to get the best out of the KTM package, whereas Brad's still kind of churning away at this. Well, this is how I want to ride this bike. We've got to set this bike up how I want to ride it. And I think that's been the biggest downfall of Jack. I think Brad has been a bit more versatile in some ways and has changed things to accommodate a bit more. And we can see it by the results. He's still, the top KTM in the championship, still, when things go right, is able to qualify first two rows and run with the front guys, where Jack, that exercise, it's just ended. That exercise has ended. So yeah, it's a weird one, and Sven Grun makes a good point here. In the article saying Danny is saying they're developing the bike to Acosta. Hats off to Acosta, because the guy's coming in as a rookie, and for this KTM project, after 17 rounds of MotoGP in his first season, for that whole project, and a guy like Danny Pedrosa, who's been there for 5 years now, to go, right, that's the way we need to go. From the 20-year-old kid who's just climbed on a MotoGP bike, you have to pat the guy on the back. You really have to pat the guy on the back for what he's doing. And I think Brad, he's a competitive guy. Of course, he's not going to be happy that, but at the same time, if it takes the package forward and it makes a bike better for me to go faster on, I'm sure Brad will go, I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that point, if you go back to what Aki said about Acosta in Moto2, you only had to speak to him once to explain to him what he needed to cut back on, change, whatever. I can't remember exactly. Speak to a 19 or 18-year-old kid once. His brain is a proper racing brain, which some people have got it and some people haven't. And I think, it is all credit to him, but it doesn't mean anything detrimental to Brad, not at all. Brad's taken this project from almost a no-hoper to third in the championship, winning races, so he's certainly moved the project forward. But maybe he has got to a point where he's limited in what he wants to do to develop the bike. Pedro might move it another step forward, but Brad will adapt to that. So it'll benefit the whole team. And if you think about it, I agree with you, Jack. We're not getting too much out of him. Is there even a fourth bike on the grid? So Fernandez is nowhere. At least next year, and we've mentioned it, they're going to have more riders, more input. Maverick, they might get some good stuff out of him. I don't think he's going to go there willy-nilly to help them. I think he's going to go there looking after Maverick, but still, he's fast. So there's going to be that pool of information is going to be, I think, exponentially better.
It's just got me thinking. This comment's just got me really thinking. Gary Granger read an article last week where Stoner spoke very highly of Brad. Reckons he's definitely a threat on a good bike. Reading between the lines. Now, Gary, that as I read that, it kind of got the wheels turning. In I only have 2 cogs left in my brain. I don't have many left, after my years of battering myself. But if there's definitely similarities between Brad and Casey Stoner's riding style. Now, if you think about that, if I think a Casey Stoner on a modern day MotoGP bike would not be the same Casey Stoner that was riding the bike back in the day, sideways, spinning it up. And then I think Brad Binder on those style MotoGP bikes would be phenomenal. I think Brad's a bit more that old school riding style, doesn't want to rely on the electronics so much. Sheridan Rice has always said to me, look at Brad's, not decline, but Brad's, momentum in MotoGP and what has been the biggest factor of it. And I think someone mentioned it last week. I don't know if it was Wayne Taylor or someone, but as this aero has progressed, the Brad Binder kind of thing has decreased a bit, because that kind of riding style doesn't fit in with aero. The aero is designed to kind of load the front and keep things in shape and do these kind of. And if you look at Marc Marquez's riding style back before aero, sideways, all action, Brad Binder style, chatter. They didn't even complain about chatter back then because chatter was part of the game. Throw aero in, Mark has his accident. Yeah, okay, there was a sensor issue or whatever, but certainly that there was this decline in Marc Marquez with this aero. It's like you can't ride the bike like that anymore. And this is, not pointing the finger at Brad and not thinking that I know more than Brad or whatever. From the outside, I just look at it and go, you clearly can't ride the bike like that. Pedro Acosta coming in this year and riding it differently to the way Brad and Jack are riding it proves that, right, you can't ride aero or the KTM like that. It needs to be ridden more direct, more smooth, especially over a 24-lap race. You think how much downforce that aero is putting on the front. They've got aero everywhere, middle, front, back, top. There's just downforce on that bike. So now if you're overloading that downforce, that already high downforce, my general kind of common sense brain tells me, well, that's just overloading the bike, which is overheating the tires, which is overcompensating on suspension and everything. And so, it's a very good comment there by Gary Granger. And if I make that comparison, I do think Brad back in the day on those bikes that had no aero, more kind of on the rider, I think Brad would thrive. I think the more that we're going into this prototype of aero electronics, maybe hampers a rider more like Brad, where not so much Pedro, who's more of a modern day, the Spanish are brought up like that. They brought up to that European riding style. So there could also be a theme there. That's just spitballing.
Yeah, Rob, a couple of things. First of all, I want to say how's it to Gary Granger. He's an old mate of mine. I've known him for 100 years. Nice of him to tune in. What I wanted to say is, does it not then show a little bit of a weak point in Brad in that he cannot adapt? Could that be part of the problem? I'm asking the question. I'm not pointing a finger. But I said it last year. We've agreed upon it. Pedro came into this year with zero expectation. So he's adapted to how the bike should be ridden. Brad needs to adapt to how the bike should be ridden. Brad's riding, and your point is so valid with the aero. This aero, thank heavens, in 2 years' time, they're restricting it.
Yeah.
But right now, it's just getting more, it's putting more and more emphasis on the machine as to the rider. And if you don't do things correctly, the aero doesn't work, so your package doesn't work. Where Brad, I think if they said, okay, we're going to do last race of the year, take all the aero off for everybody, Brad will give them such a hiding, because he'll be able to ride the bike exactly as he's riding it now. So I think, but my point being that maybe Brad needs to, and I'm not saying he's inflexible, but maybe he needs to start now, that while there is all the aero taking effect, adapt to get the best out of the aero and try and get away from this sideways disadvantaging, if that's the right word, the use of the aero, where Pedro might be using it a little bit more to his advantage.
Because people can then use the argument of, and I know some people posted on Facebook on Friday when Brad went quickest, and they went, you see, I told you, an out of shape Brad Binder is a fast Brad Binder. Yeah, that's fine. But again, it reached that brick wall. Brad was able to go a little bit faster. Brad's problem is not going fast. He seems to be able to get to a lap time fast. He gets to a lap time really quick. He can climb on that bike and go fast. You can see he spends the whole week, even in his debrief, we've got to find a race setup. We've got to find a race setup. We've got, that's maybe why they spend so much time in the pits. And he knows, right, if I got to pull out one lap, I can do it on a bike that's not even set up. I can do it on anything. I can do it on a tricycle. But I'm really focused on this race, which is the way to go. Brad's always had that Sunday 26 lap whatever mentality, which is the way to go. But kind of hits this brick wall, sets alarm, hits, and everyone else just goes. Brad can't. This time worked in his favor because he went fast enough to be on the first 2 rows. Perfect. You're in with a shot now. KTM launch device. Perfect. You're in with a shot now. First 4 laps, you're in with a shot. Great. But then you kind of, I think Wayne Taylor said it earlier, at this point in time, unfortunately, as a Brad Binder fan, you're not sitting there going, yes, he's in this. Yeah, I've got this. And this is my exact argument with the commentators. They're going, oh, yeah, Brad's in 4th. Great ride. But check out Bagnaia, because they kind of know that what's coming. It's either going to be a technical issue, it's either going to be a crash. And in some ways, it was Pedro as well. His sprint race crash was a big shock because it was like, this kid's going to win the first race. It was written in the stars. The headline was there. Dorna were rubbing their hands together. Espeleta was rubbing Spanish. Oh, this is like the perfect fairy tale story. KTM hasn't won in how many years? And, a Spanish Pedro Costa will do it. A Binder South African and a Miller Australian can't do it, but a Spanish, so there were all these things. And then down he goes. Sunday, it wasn't a big surprise. Oh, Pedro Costa's crashed. It's kind of like, okay, well, this is the theme playing out now. It's kind of like, okay, well, Brad Binder's proven the point and told us. So that, to me, is the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems, and we've mentioned a lot of them now, is that fact that I don't know Brad's thought process or whatever, but it clearly gets to a point where he must be going to sleep every night going, for God's sake, the Groundhog Day. This is just Groundhog Day. I can push for a lap. I can go fast. I can be competitive, but what the hell am I going to do for 26 laps on Sunday? I can't push because I'll land on my head, and then I'll get just everyone on my case. Or do I bring it home in 6 and get, it was the first non-Ducati home. Oh, well, he's 5th in the championship now, ahead of Pedro Acosta. So I feel for Brad because, and there's the likes of us going, change your riding style, do this, which is, again, just us on the outside looking. We don't have the magic ball, and we're not technicians and masters of MotoGP. It's just, outside feedback. But gosh, I do feel I would love to be a fly on the wall with Brad for a race weekend just to see where he actually is, because even when I was at Silverstone with him, there were some murmurings of this and that and this and that. I'll never fully kind of digress what was said and stuff, but I don't think he fully lets you into everything that's happening, because why would you? Because it's, I need to sort it out myself. And Brad's very much I need to sort it out myself kind of guy. But I don't know. It's just Groundhog Day, which for us is frustrating, and for Brad it just must be torture. Sven Gruner says, Matt Oxley commented that he's never seen Brad so down before. It's horrible to see. We saw Brad in Indonesia hitting his bike. We've never seen Brad. So I don't know. Let's hope something can happen there soon. But it's certainly not as bright and cheerful as it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And I think we've kind of discussed this point and we'll never know because we don't know the ins and outs. I'm just wondering if Brad is now starting to think in his head, yes, I've got another year of this contract to run. If that self-doubt starts to creep in, can also be not a good thing. And I have no idea if he's even thinking about that. But I would start to worry just a little bit. So I hope that's not the case. And let's hope that things turn around in the near future, like next weekend in Australia.
Paul, I don't like to use football kind of analogy in bike racing, but if I look at the club that I support, Man United, and please no one come bomb my house or do anything, please. But if you look what happened there, they had Sir Alex Ferguson, there was an identity. They then tried to, Ferguson left, they then tried to replace or keep up that identity with buying power, buy this player, buy this. But it lost its identity. Man United are nowhere near the club it used to be. And I bring that up because Deep Sea Diver Smith makes a very good point here. KTM tried to buy success taking Ducati staff. KTM should stick to the guys that are KTM in their blood. Now, is this maybe not what's happening? Is that the likes of Honda, Aprilia, not so much Aprilia, Honda, Yamaha, and KTM are trying to buy the success and forgetting their own identity and what made them good. Deep Sea Diver makes a very good point. Why not your KTM Austrian brand? A Ducati, an Italian's never going to be an Austrian. An Italian can't live in Austria, an Austrian can't live in Italy. It's just different cultures. So trying to mix that recipe together is it not setting it up for failure? Trying to buy your success. Man United trying to buy these players that will never fit into the club's identity. They don't know how to wear the badge on the shirt and play that way. Ferguson got the best out of average players, but he made them Champions League and cup winners. So is that maybe the process, the problem, the biggest problem that KTM, Honda, and Yamaha are trying to do? Okay, well, the quick fix is buy that Ducati guy, buy that Aprilia guy, just bring them in and let's get their philosophy. He makes a very valid point there. The history books until now are showing that it doesn't work. Yes, like you said, Jack had a little spark at the beginning of his kind of tenure. And has Ducati losing all these people, has it slowed them down in any way? No. Why? Because their identity and their cultures remain the same. And Gigi Dall'Igna's lost all his top right-hand men and this guy that should have had an impact on them. It hasn't. And why? Because they've stuck to their culture. So I agree with Deep Sea Dive. I've never really thought of it like that. But maybe it is. Go, you know what? Let's hire our Austrian guys again. Let's hire our guys again, unless they just don't have those kind of minds or people. But maybe that's the way to go. Maybe Yamaha and Honda should trust their identity a bit more and go with their ways. Or, again, has this aero and this modern-day MotoGP just taken it way out of the realms of their possibilities?
Yeah, it's a very valid point. The problem is, and the way I see it is, Deep Sea Diver's point is very valid. But now, so let's take KTM as an example, or Honda. They brought someone on board. You don't notice an immediate effect. It takes a little bit of, so now you one season down the line and suddenly you realize, or 2 seasons, gee whiz, we haven't moved anywhere near as far forward as we wanted to. Now your Austrian guy has moved on somewhere else. So it can become a very vicious cycle. I think the sentiment is not a bad sentiment, but I don't know how, in all fairness, KTM, Yamaha, Honda, and less so, but also Aprilia, they're panicking because it seems like every week they're just falling more and more and more behind the Ducatis. So they are in panic mode. So they're clutching at anything or anyone. Not to say the people they are buying can't do the job, but as you say, there's more to it than just the job. It's the culture. It's the being away from home. It's a hell of a thing. So yeah, very valid point, very difficult one to overcome. There's certainly no easy fix, which we've seen specifically with Honda and Yamaha, because if there was an easy fix, Honda made drastic changes in the last 3 years. And now see Ken Kowacha's gone, from the end of this season. So once again, now that's Japanese, once again, they haven't had any immediate effect. I think this is his 2nd season. It's not working. So move on. So part of me says, yes, that's the right thing to do. Part of me says, but you know what? You might just be at the turning point, and whatever he wanted to do for tomorrow might be the right. Such a difficult one, Rob, because they're under pressure. If it wasn't, and let's be quite honest, the Ducatis are a league ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
If it was one weekend a Ducati, one weekend Aprilia, one weekend KTM, one weekend different story, then everyone would feel they're in with a chance. But it's not. Here's Ducati, and the other 4 manufacturers are just playing catch up. So it puts pressure on them for whatever. So they try, they almost, it's like they're swimming in the same gene pool, and the Ducati's in a different gene pool, and they're just sharing almost the same ideas, but they're not going anywhere. I don't know, it's such a difficult one, but the sentiment could be quite right that, go back to that identity, which I've said it all the time. In 2014, when Gigi moved to Ducati, I'm telling you now, he moved there with a fixed plan. And he said to Dovi at the time, this is how we're going to win this world championship. And it took, as I said, took them 7 years, 8 years. Dovi being the Brad Binder, got everything to that point, and Pecco's benefiting, and Martin's benefiting, and everyone else. So, yeah, difficult one. But I don't know, is there a crystal ball out there somewhere? Certainly, Honda, Yamaha, KTM are throwing everything to try and find that crystal ball.
I go back to that documentary on the MotoGP YouTube page, that resurrection of Ducati, where, as you said, Gigi Dall'Igna is the turning point. Gigi Dall'Igna is the standout factor here. Yeah. Like I said, he's lost all his soldiers and whatever. That project is still going because they got Gigi Dall'Igna at the helm. Now, there's not Gigi Dall'Igna's lying under rocks, everywhere. But and you've just mentioned it, one key thing he went is, I came in here with a plan. I wanted to do things my way. I wanted to hire people for their roles, and they had to understand their roles, and we worked as a unit. Now that's hard to do, or that's harder to do, because he's hiring Italians. So he's hiring this Italians. You have that Italian passion, have that Ducati kind of cap on their head. You know, they have the DNA, they know the direction, they know the heritage, they know everything about it. Now, and I look at my situation just immigrating to the UK, where in South Africa I did my things and I ran MRW the way I wanted to. I did Ride Fast the way I wanted. I did things the way I wanted to, because that's how I believe they went. Now I come here, got to leave that all behind, and I've got to climb into this working culture of an electric bike brand, Zero Motorcycles. You know, it's an American company, Californian. You know, so now I've come in and I had to really adjust, because my first couple of months, even now, I'm still, why aren't we doing this, and it's bashing heads a little bit, and you know, I'm still struggling to kind of get onto the same page and wavelength as them, because they have this identity which is Zero and electric bikes since the start, but I'm, you know, Ducati Superbike guy, ridden all these, you know, a different identity, purely a different identity, a different way of doing things. So, you know, I could see that now as we delve into this conversation. Is that what's happening at a KTM, a Honda, and a Yamaha, where it's go, okay, you can bring in this Ducati guy, and he stands there with his arms folded and goes, right, this is how we're going to make this KTM into a Ducati. And these guys just go, well, no, you know, no, you saying this, but no, our KTM's always done this, or we've always believed in this. Big case in point, WP suspension versus Öhlins. You know, that's probably the biggest case in point. WP, yes, it's their company, so they're always going to go with it. But you know, is there this identity differential that just can't gel? Just you bashing heads. So yeah, cool, put that setting in. Yeah, okay, I will, but it's not the right setting. You know, if everyone in that paddock doesn't believe, MotoGP is at a level where you've got to just be at your best every second. There's no room, more margin for error. And if you're not there, you know, and then quickly going back to Pedro Acosta and the development and going this route. If you think about it, the Moto2, nowhere for the first half of the season. All of a sudden, Pedro Acosta climbs on a Moto2 bike to help WP suspension develop their suspension. Straight afterwards, Jake Dixon wins races, pole positions, Vietti's win, Darren Binder's a different thing. So again, just another feather in the Pedro development cap.
Yeah, very good. And you know what? Some riders, we know it. Some riders are better at developing, not that they're better at physically developing the bike. They're better at expressing how they want the bike to perform and what changes they feel need to be made. So they can say to their technicians, engineers, computer guys, X is happening, I want Y to happen, and I think this is how we change it. Where some riders don't have that, whatever it is, whether it's the actual verbal communication skills or that feel. I firmly believe guys like Rossi, Stoner, Marquez, Pedro Acosta, they have a feeling that is 0.01% better, whether it's a reaction time or than a Brad Binder, for example. It's a natural thing. It's not a trained thing. It's natural. So I don't know, but yeah, it's one that, you know, we could debate this for another 30 years and never get to the end of it, because we don't actually know the intricacies of what is happening and where they're trying to head. So it's such a difficult thing to, you know, we can only surmise.
I think we'll leave it, the KTM project, with this comment from Anton Smith, because I think it just takes everything that we've blabbed on for the last 53 minutes and puts it into 2 sentences. Pecco said a while back, and I remember it at Qatar, it was the Qatar GP beginning of last year on the 23 bike, and they were complaining of this rear chatter and stuff. And Pecco came out and he said, I'm not here to test parts. Ducati mustn't bring me parts and put them on my bike, and I'm not here. I'm not a test rider. I'm here to race this motorbike. I want to think about racing and going as fast as I can. I don't want to think about, is this chassis better? Is this swing arm better? I don't do that. Pecco said a while back, he will not test new parts on race weekends. It's the test rider's job. That's why Brad and Miller can't get some direction, always have to try new things on race weekends with KTM. So I think that just, Paul, pretty much sums it up. Yeah. Let's move on to Pecco then. It's been labeled a very boring race. Marc Marquez said it's a boring race. So if Mark says it, it's a boring race. And it was, in terms of a spectacle of passing and stuff. everyone's now coming out. It's Formula One. It's killing the sport. You know, we forget the Jerez race where Pecco and Mark went at it, hammerant. We forget the good race. This is always what happens with MotoGP, and the Ducati story comes up time and time again when a boring race like this happens. Okay, my 2 cents with the whole thing. First of all, yes, it was boring in terms of no overtakes. I was on the edge of my seat because of where the championship is at the moment, the mistakes Martin and Pecco have made, and have in the locker to make. I'm sitting there going, I'm watching that camera and I'm, okay, this corner is down. Okay, this corner is down. Because you cannot be that fast, that precise, that mentally strong for that amount of time, especially when Martin started closing that gap towards the end. I thought, oh, Pecco, here we go, my buddy. That tight hairpin at the end of the back straight, woo, that front's going, or turn one, you're going to try and double apex it, that front's got, woo, here we go. And you could see Martin at the end, that gratitude, that tip of the cap that Martin gave to Pecco at the end was like, my bad, you should have buckled. You should have buckled. I put pressure on you like you can't believe, and you did not buckle. And for me, it was a mistake for Martin kind of showing the tip of the cap because it showed a bit of weakness. You know, Martin, very respectful guy. I take my hat off to him for being that respectful. But when you're in a championship fight, Rossi was the best of this. You don't show your opposition an ounce of you've defeated me. You should have gone, well done, my bad.
Yeah.
Kept the rest of the emotion inside. Because if I'm Pecco, I'm looking at that going, right, I've got this guy.
I've got him, yeah.
I've got this guy. I've brought it down to 10 points. He's thrown everything he's got at me in this race, and I've beaten him. I've broken this guy now. The ball's back in my court. So I tip my hat off to Pecco Bagnaia. So before I go into my next comment, I'll hear yours and everyone else's thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, Rob, that's spot on. And in the main race, we saw Pecco got the advantage. Then he certainly, and the commentators highlighted, he certainly gets to a point in the race where he's comfortable with the gap. So then he doesn't mind if he rolls off 2 or 3 tenths. And as soon as it takes Martin a couple of laps to realize that, and then he picks up his pace, I think what Pecco's doing is reverse psychology. Yes. He's slowing down enough to force Martin to pick up his pace, hoping that Martin's going to do what Martin was hoping Pecco would do. So he's now thinking, okay, I know I'm 1 or 2 tenths off maximum pace. And he's suddenly closed another 2 tenths, Martin that is. So Pecco in his head, he's thinking, okay, Jorge's on the limit now. So now I'm going to pick up the pace 2 tenths of a second. Because if he tries to follow me, I know where he's going to end up. So I think the mind games that Pecco played from the front worked to his favor. And exactly what you say. I thought exactly the same thing when I saw Martin go like that to him. I thought, yes, but what are you doing? You should ride into the side of him and say, get out the way. I'm going to beat you anyway. But yeah, so I think Pecco, his mental fortitude, and they showed his lap times, Rob, 0.4 of a second for 26 laps, obviously taking the first lap out of the race because it's a standing start. I mean, that is just, that's unbelievable. 40 minutes. And I'm not going to say in dodgy conditions, but there were still damp patches all over that track. So you had no margin for error. Absolutely nothing. So, yeah, I think that was Pecco at his absolute best. He doesn't need to pull a 4-second gap. He just has to control Martin, which he did to a T. Trying to force Martin into this mistake. I don't think the other way around. But yeah, mental fortitude, both of them out the top draw.
Just catching up on comments here. So Tulani asking, does tires have anything to do with the gremlins on the KTM? Tulani, simple answer, yes, absolutely. Paul, I've never delved that deep into the mental games, but as you said it there, I went, geez, I could see Pecco playing that game. You know, that's a typical Rossi kind of messaging him the night before, saying, listen, if this scenario plays out, do this. You know, that's the kind of thing that Rossi's taught, ingrained in these guys is, yes, you win it here, but you also win it here. And he's spelling it out like that. Oh, God, that's just like dangling a carrot there. And Martin just like running with his tongue open, going, yeah.
And as you say, Rob, they're both prone to making those mistakes when they, so that's how I definitely think Pecco was playing that game 100%.
And like I said, you could call it boring, but that's what made it not boring for me, is because, okay, I didn't dive as deep as that, but I was going, right, who's going to buckle here first?
Yeah.
Something's got to give. I was waiting for that something to give, whether it was Martin, whether it was Pecco. I was like, with everything that's on the line in Japan, where like I said, you never know what's going to happen. The track conditions, you're never going to know what. Everything that's happened with Martin in Indonesia in the sprint race, Pecco at Mazzano. These guys must have so much just going around their minds. Martin going, right, I'm going to put the pressure on. Watch that pit board come down. How are you going to deal with it, Pecco? Pecco knocks the ball back and says, okay, well, I'll slow down, give you a false sense of security, and then bang in a fast lap right at the end when you shouldn't be able to. All those kind of mind games. And that's what kept me on the edge of my seat was, first of all, how insanely good those guys are. Yeah. And I'll touch upon the Ducati thing now, but I just sat there going, my God, this is another level of sportsman. To be that physically, mentally sharp and have that much skill under all that pressure. And my God, I sat there blown away. I really did sit there and go, Jesus, is this where we are now? Like, this is really where we are at this level. So, and this is what irritates me when people go, it's going to Formula One and Ducati. I understand the frustration that it's just Ducatis. Okay, but let me spell it out in a simple way for people, right? Your son or your daughter trains harder, practices harder than anyone, and for years wasn't the best. Had to really dig deep and work for 7 or 8 years, had to really dig deep to get him or herself at the top, and then gets at the top. Now you are the best footballer, the best rugby player, the best whatever. Now you're there. Now you're the best player for 3 or 4 years or 5 years. Okay. Now everyone's trying to be like you, but they just can't beat you. Now other parents come and say, oh, no, that's not fair. Listen, he must slow down. He can't run that fast with the ball. Can't swim that fast in the pool. Slow down. It's not fair. It's not fair. Is that not where Ducati is? Should we be kicking Ducati in the teeth for all the hard work, the millions they've spent, everything they've done to create this? Should we not be patting them on the back for them taking MotoGP to where they are? Faster lap times than we've ever seen. The skill that we saw on display on Sunday. No, it's on Ducatis, but my God, they did it. Gigi Dall'Igna cracked the code to speed and to unlocking a full rider's potential. Is it his problem that KTM, Yamaha, Honda, they haven't quite figured it out yet? No one was complaining when Rossi dominated on Yamaha or Honda. No one. Or Duan. Or there were murmurings, but not like what's going on here now. And for years, it was only factory Yamahas. It was only factory Hondas. Yeah, not 8 of them, but majority. At one stage, there was 8 Hondas. There was the Camel Honda. There was the Repsol Honda. There was the Pons Hondas.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and the comparison to Formula One irritates me a little bit because, yeah, I look at it and I pat Ducati on the back. I don't hold a grudge against them at all. I say, you know what, we've seen the biggest crowds in MotoGP, so something's working, and a big shout out to the Japanese crowd. Just gotta love them, love all the little toys and gimmicks. But I just look at it and it does it grinds me, and I start typing things on Facebook in a reply, and then I just delete it because I'm like, I'm going to just create a shitstorm here. I'm going to ruin my whole weekend if I reply to this person and they come back. But I don't know. What's your thoughts, Paul, and everyone else?
Look, we've discussed it many times. We cannot fault Gigi for creating what he's created, and go back all those years when, like you say, Yamaha with Rossi, Honda with Duan, Honda with Marquez for a point. But it was only ever one rider on their mark. It wasn't, even when there were 5 factory Repsol Hondas back in the day with Duan, Crivier, Sete, Gibernau, and I think it was Okada on the 3-cylinder bike. It was only ever Duan winning consistently, and every now and again maybe Crivier or someone. Where now we've got an array of Ducatis that if Pecco falls, you guaranteed Martin will win. If Martin falls, Pecco, Mark's there, Bastianini's there. So I think that's why some people are looking at it as a Ducati Cup type of thing. But I don't agree with that. Yes, they are dominating, no doubt. They've earned it, 100%. But what I appreciated from this weekend, exactly what you said, looking at those lap times. And I hope the average guy watching MotoGP understands that at any time, the maximum amount of tire on the road is less than the width of the palm of your hand.
Yeah.
Now, this guy on a bike that can run 313 k's an hour on a 450 meter straight, is running millimeter perfect for 40 minutes with a guy 3/10, 4/10 of a second behind him doing the same thing. That to me is the beauty of the sport.
Yeah.
That and it's not just riding the bike; it's that concentration, that corner after corner. What was the track on the weekend? 17, 16 corners times 20 laps. That's 180 corners of maximum effort, maximum concentration. And if you blink, the guy behind you is going to take advantage of that. So as you say, not the best race, but the spectacle for a proper diehard spectator fan was magnificent. Absolutely fantastic to watch.
It was, and I think that battle between Martin and Pecco, I'm going to be like that every race now. Till the end of the year, it's got to that point where, as you said, all these kind of mind games are going to come in. It's going to who's going to break first. There's still mistakes in this championship, I think, definitely at the level that these guys are riding, and a Phillip Island, we saw it happen last year. Hopefully a Brad's in the mix a bit more. Hopefully a Marc Marquez can get his in the mix a little bit more. I think Bastianini's still got a big part to play in the outcome of the championship. Who does he support? Does he back up Bagnaia? Does he go, well, bugger that, I'm Lone Ranger, I'm leaving anyway? There seems to be a good understanding between Pecco and Bastianini. How does that work? Does Martin get Frankie Morbidelli on his side? Morbidelli is Pecco's big China. How does he fit into the role? There was glimpses of good form this weekend from Frankie. So there's still so much to play. And yes, it can be boring in the sense of there's not passes being made every corner, but there's still so much to play out in this championship. So yeah, very impressed with Pecco, very impressed with Martin. Came back from a tough qualifying, crashing, sprint and main race, made the best of a tough situation. It just proved that, again, that they just that step above. On the GP24s, they've dialed those machines to perfection, to their riding styles, to how they want them, and they're taking full advantage of that. Marc, I think, went under the radar a little bit over the weekend. It again just proved how good he was actually at Aragon to win on a GP23, because we know there's this little divide between them, and it was apparent this weekend again, but it wasn't apparent at Aragon. So that's starting to make that Aragon weekend just look even more spectacular for Marc. But I think just going through the motions now, Marc, this weekend, just setting himself up, getting ready for what is going to be a very, very important 2025, because that excuse of, he's on a GP23, his shoulder. This year, we said all the excuses were going to be gone for Marc. Okay, he's still holding on to the GP23 excuse, which I think is a valid one in some points, because we've seen Bezzecchi be impacted by it. DJ Antonio is a little bit inconsistent with it. There's been no real... Marc's been the most consistent GP23, put it that way. But next year, right, now we're going to see where Marc really is. I think he's very competitive. I don't think he's going to be this win every single race that people are masking out on Facebook and all over the place. I think MotoGP's got past that level of one man just completely dominating. I think Marc's going to have his work cut out for him. I think, he's lucky in many ways that Martin's not staying on a Ducati, because the Martin exercise is a big question mark. The only downside to what's playing out for next year's championship is like, right, KTM are very much on a refresh. Bastianini and Vinales have to get used to the KTM. Hopefully Brad and Vigneault and Pedro can find something and be competitive. Martin's out of the equation. That pretty much leaves Pecco and Marc really fighting it out. Bezzecchi or Aprilia also unknown. Honda's not in the game. Yamaha don't even know how much fuel to put in their bikes, so they're out of the game. You know what I mean. So that's the only thing I look to in 2025 and go, God, Martin kept this interesting for a couple of factors. His personality, the fact he's on a satellite team but on a factory bike, the fact that he had something to prove to Ducati. He's got something to prove to Ducati on an Aprilia, but he's going on to an Aprilia. He's starting his MotoGP career over in many ways, because he's only known a Ducati in MotoGP. So that's the only downside of this whole thing with 2025 is Pecco is going to be rubbing his hands together, because nothing's changing for me. I'm going to be perfect. The only thing that's changing for me is the guy next to me in the garage and how that relationship's going to affect Pecco on track. You know, how he handles Mark off track, because Mark's also very sneaky. He came from the school of Valentino Rossi. You know, he learned all those things to say in press conferences, and you know, do little things to say and do that might just upset them. So yeah, it's exciting for the rest of this year. Maybe not as exciting for next year in terms of
Well, if you think about it, we at the beginning of this year, maybe not the beginning, from the middle of this year onwards, if we'd started the championship from zero, we would have had 4 riders capable of winning the championship. So obviously Pecco, Martin, Mark, and Bastianini. Now we're losing 2 of those because I don't believe Martin and Bastianini, first year on new bikes, I don't believe, and they're not on bikes that are winning at the moment. So now we're down to Mark and Pecco. Pecco's, nothing's changing for him. Mark's got to up his game. There's no doubt about it. I think the 23 excuse is plausible, but this weekend he held off Bastianini in the main race. I'm going to say quite comfortably. He did the same last weekend. So is that a plausible excuse? I'm not. I'm on the fence on that one. But I do think we're losing the 4-rider fight, and we're going to have it because I can't see De Gea and Antonio, and I can't see Bezzecchi suddenly up in their game to be racing. I can't see it happening. Alex Marquez is not going to happen. He might have 1 or 2 good weekends, which he always does, and Fermin Aldegar is going to be the new rookie sensation. So let's see what happens there. So yeah, I agree with you. Just going back to Marc Marquez this past weekend, that lap he put in that got DQ'd. That lap was sensational. Now, I got no problem. The rules are the rules. He touched the green. Stupid rule to me, but he did it. The problem is it took them so long because apparently there was a sensor notified the software and the software didn't tell. Now, that to me is a little bit, surely what they should say is it was our glitch. How do they penalize him? I've got no problem. But he had time if they'd notified him immediately, when normally when you 2 corners past the start-finish line, it's deleted your lap.
Yes.
Now he thought he was done and dusted. So a little bit unfair from a Marc Marquez fanboy point of view. Regulations once again throw in the curveball. Mark once again obviously he was hell of an annoyed, but he doesn't bat an eyelid. He says the rules are the rules. I touched the green. Let's deal with it. The next point I want to make, which I don't know if you're going to bring it up a little bit later on, is the Alex Marquez Jean Mir crash. Yes, Marquez is an idiot, rides into the back of him, but his point is very valid. How come he gets penalized where Jack Miller takes out 4 Oaks in a racing incident and nothing happens? So, and I'm not criticizing Jack in any way. I'm just saying, come on, guys. I mean, even one of the riders, I can't remember who said what, were the stewards having lunch that they didn't see this happen with Jack Miller, but now they give Alex Marquez a long lap penalty. I think he deserves it. I got no problem with that. But Jack got nothing. And as I say, no issue with Jack. But come on, guys, let's just be consistent with no penalty or a penalty. So just a little bit of, I think, it's throwing a bit of a damper on it, Rob, where, the poor Oaks, the riders are, and it hasn't been too bad this year, but now we're getting to a point again where they're like, him no, me yes. And for once we've got a Spaniard saying, they're picking up on the Spanish Oaks, So anyway, just something to think about.
Yeah, it was a bone of contention over the weekend. The fact that it was Alex Marquez again, I don't think does Alex any favors.
100%.
Alex a tricky one for me. He seems to, that Pecco incident seems to have knocked him a bit. He's on the same Ducati as his brother. He's been there for a year longer. We know that Mark's the better talent there, but Alex, I think I asked this question a couple of weeks ago. How many more chances are the likes of Alex Marquez and Raul Fernandez going to get in this championship? It's just like, she's like, I don't know. It's not a good exercise. But anyway, Alex was a complete fault there. Go back a year ago, I don't think Alex would have complained about the penalty because that's how it was. That was the script. I understand what he's saying is, okay, well, how does this work now when he can pinpoint a couple of instances where Miller didn't get a penalty, this guy didn't get a penalty for similar things. So, and the fact, as you said, it was a Marquez and a Spanish rider kind of emphasized it even more to the stewards that, listen, Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. I think Simon Crafar is the solution. I think things will be a lot better, a lot more transparent going ahead in the future. So I think that'll eliminate a lot of the problems. A question here from Grant Evans. Rob and Paul, how do you guys see the relationship between Brad and Pedro will play out next year? Will Brad get fair shake in 2025 at KTM? My simple answer is I think exactly what we spoke about earlier. I mean, we're not going to go on about it too much, but I think there's going to have to be a certain amount of Brad, you've got to come on this side of the field a little bit and play this game. We can't keep going this direction. This is the direction we're going, which is a Paul direction. A Pedro direction. A Pedro direction. Danny's taking that direction as well. If you're going to keep saying this bike's not working for me, you've got to change something your side. So Brad's a great team player. He's proved that. He suit and tie. At the ups of KTM, he's supported them. At the downs of KTM, he's supported them. So I think their relationship will be fine. It's whether or not Brad can adjust himself to whichever way this twist that they're talking about. How big this twist is, we don't know, but can Brad twist enough for the twist, I think.
Yeah, I think it's something that will play out over time. Yes. Obviously, if Brad's beating Pedro next year, the pressure is going to be on Pedro and vice versa. So it's very difficult to say. I think personality-wise, I think they'll be fine because neither one of them is a very outspoken, rah-rah kind of guy. I think they're two very, very mature and good demeanors. They'll get on with what they have to do, mature, there to do a job, and they'll get on as much as they need to. And I personally, I don't think there'll be any dramas whatsoever.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. Jenny Blake. Alex Marquez is very consistent. He takes someone out in every race. This is unfortunately where Alex Marquez is getting to now. We're not talking about Alex Marquez in terms of performances and results. We're talking about these guys. It's kind of the only way he gets airtime these days, which is it's sad for him in many ways. Yeah. I've also had an up and down relationship with Alex. When I spend time with him at race weekends, in the debrief and that he's a great guy and he speaks well, and there's nothing not to like until he does silly things like this and the Pecco incident where you go, oh yeah, that's why I don't have a Alex Marquez top in my cupboard. Okay, Anaya Bashanini in fourth. We kind of touched upon him. Listen, he did get impacted by Brad slowing him up. There's no doubt about it, but it's not Brad's job to let you past Anaya. We've seen what Anaya can do. I think, as I said, I still think Anaya's got a big part to play in this championship. The likes of Sepang, where we know Anaya is just so good in those Sunday races, and he's becoming a Saturday threat now as well. And I think that's been the biggest difference with Pecco lately, is that he's switched that Saturday race now. And I think it's because he's got to the point where he's right. Last year he won his championship on Sunday race weekends. Saturday he took what he did and he sacrificed more on Saturday than he did Sundays. Now he's in a point where I can't. And not scary, but a weird thing to me, Paul. I don't know if you knew it, but after Indonesia, when the commentator said Jorge Martinez was his third or fourth win of the season, and I kind of went, Jesus, huh?
Yeah.
You kind of think Martin, because you remember you're not thinking of the sprint races, but you're thinking of main race wins. Pecco really has dominated. He picked up his eighth, level with Stoner, Rossi, Lorenzo, all these big riders for winning 8 races in a year. Pecco's beaten his record from last year, and it just shows you how competitive MotoGP is this year, because he's beaten his record from last year and he's still second in the World Championship. So that's what excites me. That's what gets me going.
Yeah, but that's been due to Pecco's fallibility, so he's made these mistakes, which Martinez made less mistakes. And at the beginning of the year, Martin was definitely the faster of the two. And he still keeps saying that, even now. But at the moment, I think Pecco's got his number.
Absolutely. Pecco, like I said, after I saw that dip of the cap, I was like, oh, Martin, I like your respect, my bud. But you can't show, it's not weakness, but I think you gave up a lot there to a Pecco.
He's getting in your head.
Yeah,
No doubt.
I think Pecco dented him there. Phillip, I can't wait for Phillip Island. Phillip Island's just so cool. It kind of, you know, I don't know how it'll be this year round, but we know in the past that even in World Superbikes, even if your machine wasn't at the level it needed to be, Phillip Island just was able to bring everyone
Can
together.
deliver. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just came a lot closer. And this is another thing going into there. Martin's going to be sitting there going, you know,
Yeah.
all those kind of gremlins that haunted him last year. He ticked off Indonesia, great,
Yeah.
but that's Phillip Island. So there's still so much to go on in MotoGP. I'm really excited.
Absolutely.
I don't think we have to go on about Honda and Yamaha. It's kind of there for everyone to see. Shane Sparg is asking, guys, your thoughts on Darren's move next year. Difficult weekend for Darren. Picked up a point, which was great. I have one kind of gripe with Darren's weekend. And again, this is just me from the outside. Internally, I don't. It's just me from the outside. And this can go to a couple of riders, actually. But where Darren was in the championship and everything that's happened in that race, in those conditions, in that situation, the championship leader, who's Japanese in Japan, makes the call to go slicks. You go slicks. You go with a local guy. Exactly like Pecco Bagnaia said, you can smell it in the air.
Yeah.
Something made Ayagura risk, championship lead, risk everything to go slicks. And I can only put that down to Ayagura going, this is Japan. I've seen this before. So now if I'm a Darren Binder, or anyone that's not in the championship, or even if you are, the guy in second in the championship, you go with what the championship leader's doing. Okay. Gonzalez won because he took the race. Look at that podium. Gonzalez, Selach, that other guy that we've forgotten his name on the Yamaha Motorcamp bike. I haven't seen him in years. And then he's running on the podium because they took that chance. Now, that's where I look and I go, Daz, you missed the trick. And I know it's easy in hindsight to look and say these things. But I promise you, as soon as that started, that race, and they said, Ayagura's on slicks. And I went, why is no one putting this 2 and 2 together? Japanese at Japan, championship leader, going with slicks.
Yeah, but Rob, just to put it into perspective as to how difficult a decision it must have been, Ayagura's teammate, who's second in the championship, stayed on wet weather tires. And surely, as you say, he's sitting next to It's not like Darren, who's got to send a spy down the pit lane to go peep what he's doing. This oak's in the same garage. And he's second in the championship. Like we've discussed, do what your closest competitor is doing. And when it's the Jap in Japan and he knows the weather and he says, boys, put the slicks on. How Sergio Garcia didn't have a light bulb moment and say, listen, boys, let's do the same thing, to his detriment, clearly. But your valid point with Darren, but also, we don't know who made that decision. So because Senna was also on wet weather tires. So difficult one, not a great race. Great for the Oku one, I can't think of his name now, Gonzalez. Yeah, because he made the right decision. I'm not saying Ayagura wanted to race him. He even said his pace just wasn't there. Ayagura, clever move, but the weather, normally the weather's good, but this was a bit detrimental, specifically for Darren, because what was he, 10th, 11th, 12th, and it just happened they made the wrong call. So not a great. Darren was consistent, and he's racing with good guys. Guys who are in the championship. So I think he was one place ahead of Canet, who won last weekend, and Sergio Garcia. So it's not like he's racing the Kokorots at the back there. So I think ultimately not a bad weekend. If you take, I think the first 6 were all on slicks. So take them out of the equation, and Darren's 10th, 11th again. So not too bad, but your thinking is spot on. Should have taken that risk. But hindsight's an exact science.
Exactly, absolutely. Wayne Taylor, as he says, Daz can't keep qualifying in 20th. He needs to really sort that out. Again, couch warrior stuff, whatever. But you're absolutely right, Wayne Taylor. It is. It's very frustrating. I'm sure for Darren as well, because he knows got the talent and that to fight. And you can't in Moto2. You just can't do that. In modern day racing, you just can't do that. Those days of coming from miles back and being competitive are over. One positive thing is that the team Darren's going to took the checkered flag in first, Gonzalez, and that is that's an exercise that I'm looking forward to for next year.
I wanted to say that, Rob, it's a winning team.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what you say, regardless of what went right or what went wrong, they're a winning team. And that's what I think is going to be a fantastic thing for Darren, is that it's a team that knows how to win. He's got the backing. It's that environment that's good. Certainly, I think, personally, I think it is such a big step forward for Darren. I don't want to say a step up. It's just I think he's going to shine next year. I really believe. And shine, as we've discussed. If he runs top 5, which I think he's consistently going to be doing, that will be absolutely fantastic for him.
Agreed. I think we would be a bit too optimistic to think that he's going to climb on there and all of a sudden be a championship contender and winning races week in, week out. I think, in that championship, it's hard to go from one end to another, which Darren will be doing. So I think I agree with you. I see some really good top 5s more consistently coming. I think in that environment, I've spoken about it before, I think he's going to absolutely thrive in that situation. Frankie will be on a bike, he knows. Moto 2. Anyway, let's talk Moto 3. Of course, the first champion of the year has been crowned. Alonso, that kid. Yeah, he's good, and he's doing everything right. The celebrations, the fans love him. He's just like, it's like you've seen the story play out before. Marquez, Valentino Rossi, Lorenzo. And if you look, when that kid came into the pits, the people he had waiting for him, Pecco, high five, Mark, high five. Before he could even blink his Twitter, and the kid has got the world on his feet, and rightfully so. He's on the cusp of breaking Rossi's long-time standing record from 19 footsack, for winning the most races in a 125 Moto 3 championship. So the kid deserves everything he's got coming his way. Again, if you look at, and he's proven it time and time again, in a pressure cooker environment, right? The championship's on the line. My first championship, the whole of Colombia, they knew what motorcycles were. Okay, he's got Spanish heritage, whatever, but that's fine. All those factors on him, the guy drops back and then just goes, you know what? Okay, I'll sort this out. Don't worry, guys. I got this. It was so impressive to watch, and it's hard to get too excited about Moto 3 champions these days, because if you look at Jabal Masia, failure, Dennis Fogler, failure. There's been so many, Ivan Guevara. You know what I mean? It hasn't transpired the way it used to back in the day. If you won 125s, you were a competitive 250, and that progression was always there. This new Moto 3 to Moto 2 definitely seems to lose some riders. Masia is a Moto 3 rider all day long. Foggia is a Moto 3 rider. I do think David Alonso is a different breed. I think he's climbing into a team. He's taking Jake Dixon's place, basically. Him and Holgard are going into that team that seem to have sorted out the WP gremlins and stuff. So he's staying in that same environment. And one side of me says there's no reason why this kid can't go and do kind of back-to-back championships. And another says there's definitely this graduation period in Moto 2 that needs to happen. We saw it with Pedro Acosta as well. Dominant as he was in Moto 3, he climbed on Moto 2 and he was fast. But there was this graduation period where you've got to kind of learn the ropes and then go on to your domination. And I could see the same kind of thing playing out.
Look, I just think he's special. There's absolutely no doubt. And watching on Sunday morning, at one stage, I think he had dropped back. He hadn't dropped back. He had been beaten back to 8th or 9th. The Oaks were really not making it easy for him. And he doesn't panic. He just has such supreme confidence. One by one, he picks the guys off and he makes his passes hard but fair, and they stick. It's very seldom you see, like we saw with Bastianini and Mark in the sprint, pass, back forward. He passes you, it's done. He pulls 2 bike lengths, gets on the wheel of the next guy. So I think his racecraft is supreme. I think he's going to be the exception, and you're thinking of guys moving from Moto 3 to Moto 2 spot on. Normally takes them a whole season to adapt. I think he's going to be the exception to that rule. I really do. And he's only 18 years old. His racecraft, he's got the speed. That's without a doubt. He'll carry that straight over to Moto 2. But his racecraft is just, that's very, very special talent. So let's see where it takes him. But I think next year, Moto 2 riders have already got their hands full. He's going to be a problem.
And I think for him, looking at his progression into MotoGP with the new rules and everything coming in 2027, I think it could play perfectly into his hands, into a couple of rookies' hands in terms of coming from Moto2. And that, we've seen Garcia has got some sorting out to do. Unfortunately, I see Garcia as, and we've seen these riders over the years, there's some of these really fast competitive riders that always seem to feed off those excuses why they didn't win. And I think that's one of the reasons, and exactly what you said. I use the example this weekend. Your teammate, who's your closest championship rival, makes that call in his backyard, and you go make that other call. In many ways, I look at it and I think he's giving himself an excuse to fail. It wasn't me, it's because we had the wrong time. If I think back at the Motegi Japanese and those kind of characters, there was not me. I was unlucky. And I look at Garcia and he's one of those. So I want Garcia to sort himself out. I think the not going to MotoGP impacted himself a lot. Yeah. But having said that, going back to Moto2, Ayagura is looking like a real worthy champion in Moto2 before he goes up to MotoGP, and I'm excited about that prospect as well. As you said, this year with like Pedro Acosta, the only problem with MotoGP these days is that we don't have those 2 or 3 rookies coming into MotoGP.
Yeah, correct.
One rookie coming in is great, but why announce Pedro Acosta Rookie of the Year, signed, sealed, and delivered, when it was sealed and delivered after the first round?
Exactly. The first time he got points, he had won the championship. So,
And in Japan, it was like, why? To do it. It was just like a real.
They should have. You would have think they would have done it in Austria, their home race. No. But I was very impressed with Agura taking that risk. Obviously, the local, but I mean, he had more to lose than Garcia. Yes. He was leading, and he rode like an absolute champion. So once Gonzalez passed him, he was smart enough to just back it off or keep his pace, not get involved in a battle, get the 20 points, and then Garcia threw it down the road. So. Great result for him.
Let's finish off then with a final question from Jenny Blake. What does everyone think about Somkhat Chankra? Chantra will do on a MotoGP bike next year. Paul, your thoughts first?
Rob, I'm very happy that he got the ride. Me personally, he's a character of MotoGP. If there's one guy who does the Colgate advert every time you see him, it's Somkhat Chantra. Always smiling, always happy. Think he's going to get a rude awakening. He's jumping on the worst bike, and he's got 2 guys on the bike now, and I'm talking about Mir and Marini, who moved to the Honda with fairly good pedigrees. Mir certainly better than Marini, and look what's happened. So I think I don't want to say he's setting himself up for failure. I was the one end of last year advocating, put a Moto2 rider on here with no expectation. Maybe he's going to surprise us. But it'll be a big surprise.
I'm in the same boat as you. I was excited at the prospect of getting a fresh new face. I think Honda needed it. I think that LCR team needed it. Somkhat Chantra wasn't in my top 10 of riders, I would probably say. I'm happy for him. I think there was definitely a marketing side to it with the tire passport and everything in it. He's definitely a talented rider. He's been in the championship for a while. He's won Moto2 races. He's been competitive at that level. But there's nothing that tells me that he's going to be any better than what Taka Nakagami has been. Yeah. And, with all due respect to Taka, it just hasn't worked. And especially if Somkhat's going into that team in the same kind of role as Taka, where you're just testing. And that's where Honda are going to be for a while still. And that's their biggest problem is every weekend you are testing. You're not racing. That's why I asked Tucker that question. How your thought process in a race weekend. What is the percentage split of racing and testing? And he said 70-30. 70% I'm thinking about testing, 30% I'm thinking about racing.
Yeah.
Can't do it. Modern day MotoGP can't do it. So, I think he's going to be a small fish in big water. But what a great experience. Maybe he surprises us. I don't know. But it is what it is.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Hopefully we answered that for you, Jenny. Paul, thank you so much to everyone in the comments for all the great comments once again. I think it's just been a brilliant show. I think we've delved into a lot of things. As much as it hurts me picking apart the Brad KTM kind of project, it's got to that point now where, again, I was having the conversation with one of my dealers this side, a British gentleman who's a Binder fan, but he's sitting there going, what does the future hold for Brad? And I always sing Brad's praises. He's fast, he's KTM, not, he's not showing his worth. And this guy's going, well, when did he last win? How many podiums has he got this year? How many pole? So when you start adding those stats up, it does paint a frustrating picture that Brad knows is very frustrating. We all know that's frustrating. So I hope that something can turn around at Phillip Island. We now have a week off, so next week we won't be live, obviously, because we've got a week off. I think we're going to need it for Phillip Island, and I hope Phillip Island just blows our socks off, and we get a Brad running up the front, and a Pedro. I enjoyed the fact that Pedro was in pole position.
Yeah.
I was rooting for Pedro to win that sprint race. It's as simple as that. I was rooting for him. I want to see more of that, because the more we see of that means progression, means the gap closing. There's a lot of positive things. So let's try not be negative, especially towards our Brad. Let's try and just keep the positivity out there, because the more positive energy we have out there, namaste. Paul, thank you. Everyone, thank you. And we'll have a week's break and then get ready for Phillip Island.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to it. Always a spectacular weekend. Let's just hope the weather doesn't interfere. The wind always blows like heck there, but hopefully we have great racing, great weather, and look forward to chatting in a couple of weeks' time.
And the bloody seagulls. The seagulls. Find their place there. Thank you, everyone. Paul, have a great
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
We'll chat soon. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.